Hey guys, thank you so much for joining me in another video. So I read this article that piqued my interest. I'll link it down below, but it's from Fashion Magazine and they talk about what makes a bag iconic. They go over 5 main points. They go over what they describe to be a formula. I thought we'd go over the 5 points, and then I'll go over, I think some other key aspects. But I'm also curious, are you someone that likes to buy bags for their iconic status? Do you buy for any of these reasons, or do you prefer to buy bags that are a little bit more niche, a little bit more not as popular, maybe from more like independent brands? Please let me know down below. But the first point that they talk about is exclusivity. I think exclusive can mean different things. It can be either very difficult to get, or they're limited quantities, or the demand for this bag is greater than that of what is actually produced. The article specifically points out the Brooklyn bag. Remember this bag? Like there was like a period a few months ago, maybe even last year, where it was really quite popular, talked about. I think it was like on the list index. But I was on the Coach website this morning just to check it out. The Brooklyn bag at this point, it is available right now, at least on the Canadian website. Maybe they just added more stock, but it's available in a wide array of colors. But at least when it first was launched, it was a bag that was very sought after. Or I think another aspect of this exclusivity is it is limited to those who only want to really pay the ultra high price point. But then I also think of like the Telfar tote, right? Like this was a bag that wasn't priced as high as out of luxury brands. It was difficult to get in. There were like limited drops. So, and also the resale of Telfar at the time was quite high, right? The secondhand market, it was much more than the retail price. And of course they mentioned Birkins here, but they also pose the question, would Birkins be so coveted if there wasn't a wait list, or if it wasn't something that you had to wait and potentially build a relationship to get? And then the next point that they bring up is a bag has to have a singular silhouette and how it is recognizable, and it doesn't have to necessarily need a logo. And they cite specifically the Birkin, the Dior Saddle, and the Row Margot. These bags, they don't have quite obvious branding, although the Dior Saddle does have that D, but the silhouette of these bags, it's more prominent than the branding. And then they also state that you would likely never confuse a Fendi baguette or Chanel classic flap. But I also think going further, I think it's almost these iconic bags, not always, but very often they become shapes that other brands also want to imitate, maybe put their own spin. But I think especially the Birkin, the Margot, the Chanel classic flap, a bag silhouette becomes so desired that many brands create their own spin-offs. But even if I think about the Dior Saddle bag, a lot of these bags from that era, and maybe it was just like the time that this bag was made, I do think there's something about the Dior Saddle bag where there were bags, like even if I think about like contemporary brands, the brand that's coming to mind is Guess, that had kind of these like blobular shapes that like remind me of the Dior Saddle, although that was like very much a popular, that kind of shape. If I think about like the Gucci horsebit clutch, that very like Y2K high shoulder bag style. So the next point that they mention is craftsmanship, and I actually think this is a really major topic right now as we are seeing these brands have increased their prices. I just saw Celine had a price increase, which is like, okay, LVMH does this and it is to be expected. It's just the prices have gone up so much. I think consumers are like really looking at the craftsmanship, and these products are looked at with greater scrutiny. With a lot of these stories that are coming up right now with Valentino and Dior, I think luxury is in a bit of a crisis right now in terms of the perception of the price, what you're paying for, and the craftsmanship. A lot more consumers are a lot more critical. Of course, we know that these bags aren't worth the materials, but they should at least be made with a high degree or high skill or involved in the creation of these bags. I think with these stories with like Dior and Valentino, it's making a lot of consumers like rethink what is it that they're choosing to buy. And maybe it's these other points, right, that are just as important, right? Like the, exclusivity of a bag being so much, or having a unique silhouette. But, I also think it is important that these brands, if they're going to be charging such high prices, there needs to be a high degree of skill and craft involved in the make of these bags. The next point that they bring up is cultural cachet. The article references Princess Diana, Jane Birkin, Jackie O, and they talk about the star power, like how one, quote, it girl can immortalize a bag forever. They state how the Lady Dior became a legend thanks to Princess Di, the Hermes Kelly from Grace Kelly, Carrie Bradshaw, the Fendi baguette. And then they also talk about real world application. They mention how designers may put things on the runway that can't be worn by the average person. and a bag should be in some capacity something that you can wear. I'd say this is probably like true 9 times out of 10, but even within this article, the first bag that they mention is the Coach Kiss Lock. Again, it has all of these elements. It's exclusive in that it was a very hard bag to get. It sold out immediately. It has a singular silhouette. It's a coin purse that has been oversized in this cartoonish kind of way, and it also has that like cultural cachet in that it's featured in And Just Like That. Of course, there are smaller versions that are probably a little bit more wearable and practical in design, but a lot of the bags that they mention and a lot of these iconic bags like the Fendi Baguette, the Birkin, the Kelly, the Chanel Classic Flap, Coach Brooklyn, a lot of these bags, there is a real world application for enough people. But those were the 5 points that they mentioned. And I was also thinking, just looking at bags in my collection and just bags in general, some other points that I think can add. I don't think it's necessarily like required for these bags to necessarily have to be quote iconic, but a lot of iconic bags have storytelling. It could be like a total myth or some kind of narrative, but I think there is some kind of storytelling, some emotional resonance behind a lot of these bags. Grace Kelly's Kelly bag used to shield her pregnant belly. The story behind Jane Birkin's bag sitting on an airplane beside the CEO of Hermes. I think having that like story element can also heighten a bag to that kind of iconic status. Now, not every bag needs this, but I definitely think it can make a difference. Even if I just think of like social media and TikTok, how like Balenciaga, for instance, they had like a campaign with like all of these like influencers like sitting together, just kind of further solidifying the Balenciaga City bag as the cool girl, like edgy girl, it girl bag, right? Another point that I was just thinking about is I don't think it needs to necessarily define an era, but I think there's something special about certain bags that reflect certain periods. Like, again, the Balenciaga City bag reflected that early 2000s cool girl, that edgy, carefree, relaxed style of Kate Moss or Mary-Kate Olsen from that period. And of course, I also think that these are bags, though, that have also transcended that time period, right? Of course, the Birkin was created in 1984, but I don't think it necessarily is like stuck in 1984. I think it actually embodies this Parisian carefree woman that I think Jane Birkin embodied. I do think bags can define an era, but also extend beyond that period. Again, like the saddle bag or the Fendi Baguette are very Y2K coded, but they've also surpassed that period, which I think leads me to my next point. Often these bags, not always, but these are bags that have been reissued or reinvented, or they just remain a mainstay for the brand. But these are bags that have been able to span decades. I don't think this is necessarily true for every bag, but you do see lots of brands are doing this right now, even just this year with like the Murakami to the Chloe Paddington to the Fendi Spy bag. Once a bag hits like a 20-year period, if it's iconic enough, a brand will re-release it, right? And then I also think what makes a bag iconic is its strong association with the fashion house's identity. Of course, I think of the Louis Vuitton Speedy. Of course, it was worn by Audrey Hepburn. It has been like a mainstay for the brand, but it represents Louis Vuitton's travel heritage, right? Birkin references the hack, which was meant to hold equestrian gear. It can help when a bag has a strong association with the fashion house's identity or heritage. I'd love to know, do you guys like to buy bags that have this icon status? Personally, I will say early on when I was buying bags, I thought it was something really cool to have all of the icons, but I will say as someone that has tried several of these bags, and I still have some of them in my collection, I have realized a lot of them do not suit me. But I am still fascinated how bags can become so culturally prevalent. For instance, I think about like the Dior saddle bag. I remember when that bag came out, I was curious enough to want to try this bag on, and I realized I didn't really like this style for me, like that Y2K look with like the high up on the shoulder. Of course, when it was reissued, it could be styled in such a way with the crossbody, but yeah, it's just the design features, even on an aesthetic level, didn't really speak to me. It's like an iconic bag I thought should I aspire to get, and I realized, you know, that's not really a bag that is for me. That made me think like it's not really something that I aspire to have like all the icons. But again, I do think it is fascinating to look at. But I'd love to know, do you like to buy the icons? Do you like to find like more niche bags? Do you like a mixture of both? I'd love to know your thoughts. That's my video for today. Thank you so much for joining me in another one, and I hope to See you in the next one. Bye.